Okay, so first of all, thanks for having me here, Catalina and Gerard. So I just wanted to also discuss a bit this two ideas, two things that Frederique introduced, and essentially also discuss whether there is really a trade-off between the two, between excellence and research that has an impact on society. So I'm going to draw on the research that we've done on those topics over the last 10 years. It's going to be a lot more micro-based than at the country level. So it's going to be based on a particular program that we analyzed of a particular area. And as you'll see, we'll be focusing on industry collaboration. So away from patents that were discussed before, but super important channel of knowledge transfer. Okay, so let me start with the European paradox, not because I believe that's true, but that that's essentially what got me into this area of research, right? So that essentially was what motivated me to start doing research on that, right? So here you have essentially the two ideas. So excellence in research that has of super high quality, which might be different with as compared to the research that can have an impact on not only on business and the economy, but also on society, as Jesus was mentioned, right? And essentially, the European paradox is this idea that essentially we're good at research excellence, but we're not super good at research impact. Okay, so put here like that's essentially the idea, right? So if you put this into axis, we're up there with the US in terms of excellence, but we're more to the left in terms of impact, right? And as Frederique said, it might be that we're not essentially as good either in terms of research excellence, right? So we're at the end at the bottom left corner, right? So the question is, this goes, can we climb up and write, essentially? So can we achieve research excellence and research impact at the same time? Okay, so in particular, can or will our top researchers be able to collaborate with industry? Will they do it with the firms that are the most research intensive, the most innovative ones, right? So how does this impact their careers, their academic careers? Do these collaborations essentially improve the research projects they do, right? So these are the kind of questions that we've been addressing in this research over those years, right? So more generally, I would put it into two questions. One is, what are the patterns that we observe in terms of university-industry collaborations, and what are the results of these collaborations? Okay, so I'm going to show you evidence on the particular agency in the UK, right? The Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, that not only they were very keen on give us the data that allowed us to do all this research, but also is an agency that is super important in the UK. So it funds most, the majority of the academic departments in engineering in the UK. And in particular, it has, since the very beginning, since the mission statement back in the early 90s, an emphasis on doing research that is at the same time excellent, but also useful for society, right? And then since the beginning, they had this feature that allowed the researchers to submit projects, applications that included collaborations with private firms, right? With what they call project partners, right? That would play an important role within the research project, right? And roughly a third of the projects that they fund are of those kind, right? So that's essentially what we're going to be looking at, right? So just to give you an idea, this is one example of one data point in our database, right? So this is a professor in Cambridge that is a specialist in electron microscopy, right? That had a project with this world-leading firm in the production of microscopes, right? This is an example of a top researcher of a top university doing basic research that essentially collaborated with this firm, this top firm, very research intensive, and that also does what in the industry would be considered basic research, right? So in one of our research projects, on our papers, essentially we were asking whether this, an example of having a top researcher collaborating with the top firm is something that it's just anecdotal or is something that happens in general, right? So the questions that we're asking, something like, do top academics collaborate with top firms? And whereas the less productive collaborate with less productive firms? That is, do they match on essentially the quality? Or do they match because of their preferences, right? Do researchers get the firms they want? The matches are based on what? Are based on the fact that he's a good researcher or the fact that he's at Cambridge, right? And that's also an important question, are the top researchers those that collaborate, or are the ones that are less good? Okay, so that's the questions we were asking in this paper, and as I was saying, we're using this data from the EPSRC, and we constructed measures of productivity of the academics and the firms, right, based in a lot of bibliometric analysis, which allow us to not only productivity but also type of research that they do, and then we have a bunch of other characteristics, right? So, what are the results that we got? Just to tell you, just to give you just the results. First is indeed that's the case. The top academics are those that collaborate with the top firms. So there is matching on quality, essentially, especially at the very top, right? So the ones that are in the top scientists collaborate with the top firms. Those that are more at the bottom is less clear how they choose each other, right? They also, of course, choose them based on the type of research they do. So the ones that are more basic collaborate with more basic firms, and the more applied collaborate with more applied firms. Okay, but the importance here of research excellence, right? So going back to this trade-off I had at the beginning, indeed we have that the top researchers are those that collaborate with the top firms, right? And not only that, but the top researchers also get to choose firms that are closer to them, okay? So essentially, you can interpret this as they get their best choices, right? And one thing that's important, at least, essentially in our research, it shows that it's more important the individual characteristics than the university or the institution they're at, right? What about the decision whether they collaborate or not, whether they apply together with firms or without them, right? And here again, at least in our data, the top researchers are those that collaborate with firms, right? Significantly more, right? Of course, they're also the more applied that collaborate, not the more basic, like in our example, but in terms of quality, the ones that are top are the ones that collaborate more. Okay, and again here, the characteristics of the individual are very important. So going back to my initial slide, right? So whether the pattern that we saw of this particular example is the most common, most of the things the answer would be yes. So for example, we have matching on quality. So top academics collaborate with top firms. They also collaborate based on preferences. In fact, on preferences is even more important than on this horizontal, we call this horizontal dimension, would be even more important than the vertical one. We get also top researchers getting firms that are that are closer to them. Individual characteristics more important than institutional ones, and also the less productive collaborate less, right? Although are not of course not the more basic, the ones that collaborate less. Okay. This is about essentially the what we observe in terms of collaboration. Then the second question, and that's in other papers we've been working on that, is what is the impact on of these collaborations? And here you have an example of what's the impact of having collaborated in the past on future research productivity, right? So we studied that because of course this can be it's controversial, and essentially what we ended up settling on was that this is kind of it's good to collaborate up to a point, right? So the ones that collaborate zero, they end up being in a worse place than those that collaborate a little, right? There is in fact an optimal level of collaboration, and then after a point, then it becomes worse, at least for your just pure academic career. So in terms of publications, right? Another thing from another paper that we studied, we looked at the results from the project. So I told you that there were projects that were collaborative and projects that were not, right? And the question is, are the results that are collaborative, do they end up with more publications or with less, right? And the answer that we got is, okay, it depends, okay, as always in economics, right? But it crucially depends on the type of firm you work with, okay? So if you work with a firm that is highly research intensive, then the results of the project are much better than if you haven't collaborated with any firm, right? But if you end up collaborating with a firm that is, might be a lot less research intensive, then the results might be worse than if you haven't collaborated at all, right? So, I mean, that was essentially our policy recommendation is, okay, maybe we should decide whether we reward or not collaboration, but we might also want to evaluate the firm, right? So whether the firm is research intensive or not, okay? In the last sort of work we have done, okay, we have analyzed not only the research, not only the results of the projects that were funded, but we have analyzed it. We have analyzed as well whether project gets funded or not. Okay, so we had projects that were rejected, projects that were funded, and we essentially analyzed the characteristics of the projects that, the likelihood of being accepted based on the characteristics of the project, right? And there are many things that are, of course, not surprising. So better researchers more likely to get funded, and more senior as well. Being in a good university also makes you more likely to be successful in the funding process. But one of the things that also is important, very important, is having a collaborator, having a firm partner. That's also something which is significant in our regressions. I'm done. Okay, so just to conclude. So essentially, I mean, I'm going to try to argue that essentially, a bit like Frederique said before, research and excellence and research impact can and do hold simultaneously. So really the top researchers are those that collaborate with the top firms and are those that collaborate the most. And academic career from collaboration doesn't suffer, and especially if you end up collaborating with good partners. Okay. And I just wanted to stop here, but just like last point, right? So this is something that, again, the UK government or the UK evaluation process is also taking on as something very important. In the next evaluation of the universities, they're going to include research impact as a very important determinant of university funding. And the good thing is that this research impact should come from, at the same time, from excellent research, right? So, I mean, again, taking into account that, the two things essentially go together, okay?